If you don't know by now, Rolls-Royce can be summed up in one word: luxury. However, luxury does age, and this 2013 Ghost was missing something: Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Today, Beamer Tech will show you how to give your Rolls those features that it never had from the factory. Welcome back. I'm Dylan with Beamer Tech. This 2013 Rolls-Royce Ghost with CIC will be getting our wireless CarPlay and Android Auto MMI Prime. This device will integrate Apple CarPlay and Android Auto right into your Rolls-Royce, giving it a look and feel as if it would have come straight from the factory. This device also allows for camera integration, screen mirroring, and so much more.
You can install this yourself if you want with our DIY Essentials Kit and Trim Tool Kits. But if you don't want to do it yourself, you could find one of our certified installers near you. We have them in about 30 countries around the world. And if you're in the Orlando, Florida area, well then stop on by and we can do it for you.
Today, Jarrett is going to show you how to install this in your Rolls-Royce Ghost. Jarrett, take it away.
Before you begin the installation, you will need to make sure the battery is disconnected. Start by popping the boot. Sorry, I had to. Anyway, once you have it open, lift up the closest part of the floor panel and remove the two 10mm plastic nuts. Once removed, lift the panel up over the studs and pull it out. Disconnect the negative battery terminal with a 10mm socket and set it aside. You'll want to tie a towel around the boot latch to keep it from closing and locking you out. Now we have to start removing some trim inside, starting with this thin silver trim here. To help protect the surrounding trim, Jarrett placed some delicate surface painter's tape over the neighboring trim. Keep in mind that this piece is taped in place from the factory, so very carefully insert a thin trim tool here like so and work the trim free. You can then remove your protective tape. You'll then need to remove the trim that was under it. Jarrett opted to protect the gauge cluster with some tape. Insert a trim tool behind the trim and push it forward. Use your hands to pull it free. Remove the two screws that were behind the trim. Before that side trim can be completely removed, let's remove the chrome surround. Tape off the areas where you'll be using a trim tool, and carefully start working it out. And set it aside. With that surround trim removed, you can go ahead and use a trim tool to remove this trim here. Once it is removed, pinch and pull the connectors in the back to disconnect them. To remove the center button section, we'll need to remove some more trim on both the passenger and driver sides. Start by removing the T30 screws holding the passenger center side panel in place. Once free, move over to the upper passenger footwell panel. Remove the two T30 screws on either side. With the screws removed, we can start pulling back some of the trim. Start by pulling away the side trim like so. You can completely remove it if you want, but this will make the reinstallation much easier, and completely removing it simply is not needed. Now for the upper footwell trim. Grab it from the front, starting in one corner like so, and carefully pull it down. Even with the battery disconnected, it's always best to avoid disconnecting airbags if possible, so Jarrett unplugged a few of the other connectors to give him some slack and simply pulled the panel down to get it out of the way to get to the screw that we really need. For now, more trim needs to be removed. This side panel is next and can be removed simply by pulling it forward. It's best to start from the bottom. Remove the two T20 screws on the side of the dash trim. Open the glove box and remove the two T20 screws securing the bottom of the trim. Carefully pull forward on the trim to remove it. Remove the two connectors behind it simply by pulling. Now let's move on to the driver's side. Remove the screw holding the side panel down just as you did on the passenger side. Pull the panel off to the side, but again, no need to fully remove it. Next, the two screws for the footwell trim. Once free, pry down the panel to remove it. Make sure you place your trim tool far enough to pull down from the airbag if possible. This will cut down on the risk of pulling the outer portion of the trim off and potentially damaging it. Move the panel down and out of the way, but again, there is no need to fully remove it. Last but not least, remove this screw here as you will need to feed some cables through this area later. Now you can start to remove the center button section. On the driver's side, start with this T20 screw. Remove the same one on the passenger side. Now remove the two upper T20 screws holding the panel in place. Finally, remove the two outer screws at the very top of either side. Now you can remove the center panel. Start by pulling from the bottom on either end. Carefully slide it forward and out over the center console. Remove the connectors by pressing in the center tab and rotating the arm down to unlock it. Remove the panel and set it aside. Now it's time to remove the head unit. Place a towel down over the center console to avoid damaging it. Remove the four T20 screws that surround the head unit. Once free, pull the head unit out. With it out, start disconnecting it. These two by sliding out the tab, pushing the tab up, and pulling the connector out. This one is the same, but a trim tool may help reach the tab. These by pushing in the center tab and pulling. And finally, the quad lock by pinching in the sides and rotating the arm to release it. Put the head unit off to the side. Since we'll need to relocate the fiber optic cable later, let's remove it now. Locate the fiber connector in the quad lock and use a trim tool to lift up on the retaining tab and pull back on the fiber connector to remove it. Now let's move on to the iDrive controller to tap into it, since this is a CIC system. Start by removing the left button cluster by pulling up. Disconnect it by pinching in the sides of the connector and pulling. Do the same with the one on the right. For the controller itself, remove the four T20 screws holding it in place. Once the screws are out, lift it up and disconnect it the same way as the others. Now let's start feeding some cables. We'll start with the iDrive harness. Take a large cable tie and feed it down through where the factory cables come through the console molding and out the side of the center console near the top back of the driver's side footwell, which is where the MMI will go. It may take a couple tries to feed it through the optimal path, but it can be done. At this end of the cable tie, tape this end of the BeamerTech iDrive controller harness to it. Carefully pull the cable tie to feed it through like so. At the back end of the harness, plug the factory connector into the BeamerTech harness. Make sure it's plugged in all the way, as a partial connection may seem as if it's in all the way, but you'll have an unresponsive controller. To be extra safe, Jarrett decided to add some tape to everything, which is not needed, but Jarrett wanted to be extra safe. You can then tuck the harness into the center console. The small connector is for different iDrive controllers, so it will not be used for this installation. Grab the controller and plug the other end of the BeamerTech harness into it. Put the controller in place and reinstall the 4 T20 screws. Reconnect and replace the 2 button clusters. Remove the tape and cable tie from the other end of the harness and feed it up here. Reinstall the screw. Let's start with the rest of the cables now. First, the quad lock. Grab the factory quad lock connector, and while making sure the arm is in the unlocked position, plug it into the BeamerTech plug-and-play harness. Push it in and rotate the arm down to lock it into place. To give a little more slack on all of the other cables, Jared decided to remove the factory tape to free them. To keep things from getting too jumbled up, you could tape back up all the other wires that go into the quad lock into one loom, and the rest into another. Insert the factory fiber optic connector into the outer slot in the back of the BeamerTech quad lock connector. Slide all of this into the left side where the factory harness comes out to allow room for the head unit to be reinstalled. In an effort to keep things tidy, secure what's ready to be plugged in. Take the LCD out video cable from the BeamerTech kit and plug the factory pink video cable into it like so. You can then feed that down through the side into the footwell area to be plugged into the MMI Prime later. While here, take the LCD in cable from the BeamerTech kit and feed that through the same spot, making sure the side with the 90-degree connector is left inside the center section. Take the main harness and feed that down into the same area. Once in place, you can plug in the iDrive controller harness you fed through earlier. Now grab the Wi-Fi antenna from the BeamerTech kit. Peel off the backing of the double-sided tape and stick it on the inside of this panel right here. We'll come back to this area later. Now the microphone, which is probably the most involved part of the installation. Being careful around your headliner, use a trim tool to carefully remove the microphone and disconnect it by pulling the two halves apart. Since the mic cable will need to be fed down the A-pillar, start by removing the side dash panel the same way you did the passenger side. Next, behind the B-pillar, use a trim tool to pop off the airbag labeled cover and remove the T20 screw behind it. Use a trim tool to make a slight gap and, with your hands, pull forward to release the trim piece. This trim must be free to pop the A-pillar trim free. Much like the rest of the trim in the car, completely removing it is unnecessary and not suggested. Back at the front, use a trim tool and your hands to begin carefully popping free the trim. There is an airbag behind there, so be careful not to damage it. Much like the rest of the trim, we just need to pull it back enough to get our harness through. Freeing up the A-pillar trim is a careful dance of pulling it down and back in small sections until the gap is large enough. Once you feel you have enough room, feed a large cable tie through the microphone cutout in the headliner and down the A-pillar like so. Make sure you get behind the airbag as to not interfere with it. Take this end of the BeamerTech mic harness and tape it to this end of the cable tie. Carefully feed it through and down, again paying special attention to the airbag. Once the end of the harness is in sight, plug the factory microphone lead into the BeamerTech harness like so. Feed it up and in. Plug the microphone into the other connector of the BeamerTech harness, and snap the microphone back into the headliner. Continue feeding the harness down the A-pillar out of the way of the airbag. Feed it down to the dash, making sure it is behind the weather stripping and out of sight. Use a cable tie to secure it to a suitable location that is not the airbag to make sure it stays out of the way of the airbag. Snap the A-pillar trim back in place. It is a little tricky and may take a few tries. Once in place, snap the rear trim back in place as well, making sure the weather stripping is where it needs to be. Reinstall the T20 screw. Replace the cover. Back up front, feed the mic cable through the side of the dash and remove it from the cable tie. Plug it into the main harness you fed through the center console earlier. Now we can start plugging in the MMI. Grab your MMI and plug in LCD in, LCD out, AV USB, the Wi-Fi antenna, and the main power harness. Make sure your dip switches are set to the correct position for the size of your screen, which is indicated on a sticker on the back of the MMI. The MMI is going to live up here, so tuck it up into position and out of the way. Take this time to tidy up all of the slack in the cables. Neatly coil or wrap them up, and use cable ties to keep them tidy. Secure those harnesses to factory looms and other locations with cable ties to keep everything out of the way. The last thing you will need to feed is the USB harness. This will live sticking out from the center console for easy access, but out of the way. It will be used if you need to plug in your phone into the MMI if you're not taking advantage of the wireless CarPlay and Android Auto and Bluetooth audio capabilities. If you have an MMI Pro and are using the HDMI cable function, we suggest running the HDMI cable to this location as well. Keep in mind if you are not using Bluetooth for audio, you will need to connect the aux cable as well, but this customer opted not to use the aux audio. Since the aux cable is not being used, Jarrett taped it up and pushed it out of the way. Now for the head unit. Start with the BeamerTech Quad Lock. Make sure the arm is in the unlocked position, push it in, and then rotate the arm down to lock it into place. Everything else simply gets plugged back into where you took it out of. Make sure all of the cables are out of the way and slide the head unit back into place. Reinstall the 4 T20 screws. Now let's start the official reassembly. Grab the center panel and slide it into place. Plug in the 2 connectors with the arms in the unlocked position, then rotate them down to lock them into place. Once plugged in, slide the panel back into its home location. Before completely reinstalling everything, Jarrett plugged back in the start-stop button to give the system a test to make sure everything was working. Keep in mind that if you choose to do this, you will need to reconnect your negative battery terminal. You might want to then disconnect it again after the test until everything is back in place, just to be on the safe side. Once you're satisfied with your test, replace the 6 T20 screws on the center panel. Plug back in the Start-Stop button panel if you've not done so already. Slide it back into place like so. Upper tab first, then snap it back down into place. Reinstall the 2 side screws. And snap the side trim back into place like so. Jared installs the chrome trim a bit later. Now the driver's side dash panel. Line up the tabs and push it into place. Next, snap the driver's side floor panel back into place. While you're here, snap back in the side panel as well, which involves sliding it back into place. Make sure there is still access to the USB cable. Reinstall the side panel screw and the 2 upper footwell panel screws. Let's move to the passenger side. Reconnect anything you may have disconnected from the upper footwell trim, and snap it back into place. Reinstall the 2 screws. Snap and slide the side panel back into place, and reinstall the screw. Reconnect the dash panel on both sides, and snap it back into place. Replace the 2 T20 screws. Replace the bottom 2 screws. Replace the side panel by lining up the tabs and then pushing it into place, starting from the bottom, and now we're here. Back in the middle, snap back in the chrome surround trim. Start from the top and work it down. Jared found it easier to do with the screen cover up, so if you choose to go this route, make sure your battery is temporarily reconnected. Finally, push back on this chrome edge trim. We suggest replacing the double-sided tape. With all that done, it's time to reconnect your battery if you have not done so already. Reconnect your negative battery terminal. Slide back in the boot floor panel, lining up the holes over the studs. Tighten down the nuts. Fold back down the floor. Remove the towel from the boot latch, close the boot, and you're done.
And that is how you install BeamerTech's wireless CarPlay and Android Auto MMI Prime in your Rolls-Royce Ghost with a CIC head unit. Of course, if you have any questions during your installation, you can reach out to our support team with your order number and they'll be eager to assist. But as always, for more tips and tricks, product reviews, and so much more for BMWs, Mini Supers, and now Teslas, and of course, Rolls-Royce, make sure you subscribe and don't forget to ring that bell. Want to know what's happening first? Head on over to our website and sign up for our newsletter. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. Thanks for watching.